Let's bring in Hugo Lowell, senior political correspondent for The Guardian. Welcome to you. And before we get to discussion about the Mark Robinson situation, how do you read this announcement for the Harris-Walz camp that she has accepted CNN's invitation to another debate on October 23rd? Did this suddenly come about?
Look, the Harris campaign for weeks now have said they're open to debating Trump again. In fact, they said it the night of the first debate between Trump and Harris. And so I think this is something that Harris has been pushing for some time. And it's a kind of a way to goad Trump into seeing if he will take the bait again. She was very good at this on the night of the ABC debate. And people around the Harris campaign have made very clear that if they can get Trump back on the stage, they think they can win again. Trump has vacillated back and forth on whether he should debate again. There are a lot of advisors who think he should just go ahead and do it because there hasn't been a moment in the race where Trump has been able to cut through past Harris. Harris still kind of has the momentum, even if it's slowed. And so they see the need for another event. On the flip side, Trump is very reluctant. He has said over and over again that he doesn't want to debate Harris again. And so I think there is always this issue now of Trump wanting to do something and his advisors wanting to do something else. Well,
but to your point, he did vacillate a little bit. He left open the door right. He said, if I'm in the right mood, whatever that means. But that said, let's just reiterate that this CNN debate that Kamala Harris has agreed to on October 23rd, it involves the exact same rules that Donald Trump did agree to in the June debate. They include the moderators, the rules, the ratings, all those things. Those are things that he had said, I did so well, and he was very, very pleased with his performance on that one. So given your sense of the Trump campaign, which you have gotten to know well with all of your reporting, do you think they will encourage him to participate in this debate, Hugo?
I think it's an open question. Look, there are different factions inside Trump world who think different things. There are certainly people around him, certainly at the top of the leadership of the campaign, who think another debate will be a massive risk. That much has been clear from that previous debate. There are also people around the fringes who are kind of raring for a fight and have really been pressing Trump kind of unofficially to debate Harris again, and this time not miss any opportunities to stick it to her on what they think is the winning point on policy. And so it's a faction war. And I think how this will play out will be also instructive on how the campaign's direction will be in the final 50 days of this race.
Hey, just FYI, we have a freeze on your camera, but we can hear you just fine, so we're going to plow ahead with you, Hugo. So look, Donald Trump has not just given Mark Robinson his endorsement. He has been singing his praises about what a great guy he is. How is the Trump camp reacting to this controversy? It is in a state they cannot afford to lose in November.
Yeah, look, whether or not this has an effect on the top of the ballot is going to be the most interesting thing, right? Typically, we talk about Trump potentially having an effect down ballot, and whether Trump's incendiary remarks or his controversial comments or whatever he does on the trail impacts the down ballot candidates. And that has certainly been the case in places like Arizona, Nevada, and these other battleground states. With respect to North Carolina, I think there is a cautious optimism inside the Trump campaign that this won't rise, that people will see Mark Robinson as Mark Robinson. And if Trump stays away from the state, then that will be the best thing for him to do, because the moment Trump pulls his endorsement, which is what some advisors have been asking him to do, they know it will tank that race, and they're not sure if they want to go down that route. What they're doing in the meantime is to make sure that Trump isn't associated at all with Mark Robinson. They have no plans to have Trump in the state. They have no plans, at least to campaign with Mark Robinson. And they have this issue of, the moment he starts doing interviews in North Carolina, he's going to be asked about this. And so they're keeping a very tight lid on the amount of media interactions, funnily enough, that Trump is going to have with local news networks, which of course was their whole strategy. They wanted to be like, we do a lot of local interviews and Kamala Harris doesn't. And so that's another dynamic that's playing out.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of no plans, I just want to confirm, you've also heard there are no plans for Mark Robinson to step aside, right?
Right. As far as we understand, Mark Robinson is going to stand the race. He has communicated that to the Trump campaign, which is partly why there is this freak out inside Trump world that if he continues to weather controversy, it could start to impact Donald Trump.
Okay. We got your picture back just in time to say thank you and goodbye, my friend. We'll see you again soon. Thank you.
Donald Trump, no surprise, still using hatred and blame to drive his presidential campaign. Fresh off of amplifying racist lies about Haitian immigrants in Springfield, Ohio, the former president spewed anti-Semitic tropes this week at a campaign event titled, get this, Fighting Anti-Semitism in America.
I'm not going to call this as a prediction, but in my opinion, the Jewish people would have a lot to do with the loss. If I don't win this election, and the Jewish people would really have a lot to do with that if that happens.
Eddie Glaude and Michael Cohen are back with us.
So, Eddie, there's real good stuff there to unpack because it's important. And I think the way to begin to unpack what we heard there was listen to second gentleman, Doug Emhoff, who was not actually responding to Trump to the clips that we heard, but speaking more broadly to Trump's anti-Semitic themes that he'd been leveling up. Let's listen to what the second gentleman had to say.
He is somebody who has had dinner with known anti-Semites. He is somebody who, after the horrific events of Charlottesville, where people were actually marching with tiki torches saying Jews shall not replace us, and he said there were fine people on both sides of that. This is a guy who has had a record of saying incredibly vile anti-Semitic things. So for him to say that, I just almost laugh at how the chutzpah, as we would say, and it's gaslighting.
And that is the thing. It is the chutzpah and the gaslighting that Donald Trump has perfected in our politics. I'm reminded of, for example, the response that Republicans had when Joe Biden inferred that the African-American vote, remember the African-American vote supports, Democrats and the hue and cry, that came from that. And here you have Donald Trump saying, if I lose the election, it's your fault.
Right, Michael, and let's be clear, Donald Trump and MAGA Republicans have traded in historic anti-Semitic tropes for years now. Before this, we've heard talk about globalists. Before that, we know that they have been the spike in anti-Semitism that's tied to white Christian nationalism. We forget about the Tree of Life. We forget about all of these things that were really driven by, remember, Great Replacement Theory is being funded by Jewish globalists who are trying to change the demographic nature of the country. And so when we had this moment where there was this critique of wokeism on college campuses in the midst of the criticism of the war in Gaza, suddenly wokeism became a kind of justification for anti-Semitism. They were linked, layered, and we got these strange bedfellows in the aftermath of it. But at the heart of what Trumpism stands for is in so many ways, right, a deep-seated anti-Semitism that has in some ways fueled the campaign predicated on grievance and hatred, it seems to me.
People are less safe, Michael, when he does. I mean, that's the thing. It's not just rhetoric. It's that people become less safe.
Yeah. Let me also just say to Michael Steele, the word is chutzpah, right? Chutzpah. Almost like as if you're coughing out a fur ball, like one of the fur balls that the allegations that the Haitians are eating in Springfield. I have this YouTube show.
He's been working on that.
I had this. Right? And what's really important is on my YouTube, I have a YouTube show called The Michael Cohen Show. I had a woman from Ohio the other day who was on, and it was hysterical because she said she had 16 dogs and cats. So I asked her if anything had come up because this conversation is so stupid that we have to even engage in it. And she said, no. I said, well, good thing because you would be considered a caterer. And it was a big joke, but it's a joke because it's not funny. And it's so racist. And the core of Trump's group, this MAGA group, it's so racist. We all need to just expel this ideology out. And that's why I believe that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are surging and why the momentum is completely on their side.
There's Donald Trump, and then there's Trumpism, which is the thing that we all circle back to, and the idea that even if Donald Trump does not win this election, Trumpism remains in America. I want you to take a listen to what Vivek Ramaswamy said about woke anti-racist policies fueling anti-black racism. Take a listen.
You take 20,000 people who are unprepared to integrate into a community, dump them into a city of 50,000, you're going to get a reactionary response. Then you demonize the people who have the reactionary response, who say, oh, you're blaming me. They're going to have ill will, in this case, towards the Haitian community. It is literally fueling a new wave of anti-black racism in the country that otherwise would not have existed if it weren't for those woke anti-racist policies in the first place.
This gets to your point about the bedfellows.
Oh my God! And it's just go on. I'm sorry, Mike. Go ahead.
I just, before you give a response, I just have to say, Vivek, you're full of crap.
Yeah, I was going to say the exact same thing.
Look at what the Haitian community did when they arrived in Springfield. Eddie, I leave it to you, so I just had to get that off
Mike,
my chest.
You're so right. I was trying to edit myself in so many ways. And part of it, Alicia, is this, right? There's a sense, Vivek just traded on a whole range of tropes and invoked bad history. So if you looked at the debates around immigration in the 1920s, running up to the 1924 Johnson Immigration Act, some of the same things were being said about the immigrants. They're not prepared to immigrate into the society. When we know what happened in Springfield is that you had an influx of folk. They didn't have in place the infrastructure around schools and hospitals as they were inviting that labor into the community to revitalize it. But instead, what you do is you blame them.
Yep.
Right? And then you other them, and then you justify the deep-seated prejudice that account for folks losing ground.
I would also say, though, that part of what Donald Trump does and part of what you heard Vivek doing there was a message to Black Americans and to Latinos in this country who do have paperwork to say, well, I'm not talking about you. You're not them. These people are not doing it correctly. And for those of us who've always felt that we've needed to prove our Americanness, who felt that our citizenship in this country was tenuous at best, it is supposed to stoke a fear that these other folks, these immigrants, are going to jeopardize the thing that we have worked so hard for.
You know where the problem comes in as it relates to Springfield, Ohio? They have spoken to people from Springfield, Ohio, and they don't feel the same way that Vivek Ramaswamy is now trying to state. What Vivek Ramaswamy is doing, and please understand, I know from my personal experiences, what he's doing is every day the Trump campaign, the Trump group, they hand out talking points. And the goal is to mash in as many of these ridiculous, racist, sexist, misogynistic, xenophobic, homophobic, Islamophobic, transphobic, anti-Semitic message that they possibly can in one single sentence. That's the goal. And the more you do that, the more Donald Trump appreciates you and the higher you get elevated until you don't do it and then you fall off the ladder.
And then you have that point that you just made, the tricky magic. Buy into the nativism, buy into the ugliness, and you too can be American. You take that, and we will accept you, and the danger that follows from that.
Well, that to your point, both your point, you have the governor of Ohio, Governor DeWine, who was born in Springfield, by the way, and he and his wife have lived in that area for most of their lives, and his connection to the Haitian community is strong, given his work outside of politics in Haiti. Noted in an op-ed, quote, as a supporter of former President Donald Trump and Senator J.D. Vance, I'm saddened by how they and others continue to repeat claims that lack evidence and disparage the legal migrants living in Springfield. This rhetoric hurts the city and its people, and it hurts those who have spent their lives there. The reality of it is, and Eddie, you made this point, that the people of Springfield, I mean, Michael, you made this point, the people of Springfield, they're looking around going, what are you people talking about?
You know where it's coming from? It's coming right out of Donald Trump's Mein Kampf. I mean, it's the same sort of rhetoric where you dehumanize a group of people in order to make them less so that you can abuse them. That's what it's all about.
But, Michael, still, what does it tell you that Mike DeWine comes out, condemns these comments, and still says, I'm sticking with this guy? I'm still voting for Donald Trump.
Look, there's the politics of, there's the electoral politics for sure, and I get that. And look, I'm not going to, we have a whole lot of Republicans who are sticking with Donald Trump who I don't think should be sticking with Donald Trump. But he is, in his role as governor, as someone who knows the Haitian people, he's come out and he said the right thing. And I can't detract from that, because that for me is the more important thing, is where do you land when it comes to the racist, xenophobic, hateful language that's being drummed up about good, hardworking immigrants who have legal protections, who are here legally, and who, by the way, revitalized a community that had lost 30,000 of its people to other parts of the country. These folks had come in, settled, started businesses. Hell, the Haitian flag is raised at the State House, right? So come on, people.
But unless he goes ahead and he denounces Donald Trump and says, I cannot vote for somebody who speaks like that, the fact that he turns around and he says that these allegations are not true, but I still stand behind Donald Trump, he should not be reelected into office.
Michael Cohen.
All right.
You and I will talk about it, Michael Steele, on the other side of the break.
Yeah, I was going to say, all right, let's go. Let's ready. Let's bring it on.
Michael Cohen, Eddie Glaude, thank you both so much. What a treat to have you with us. Be sure to catch Michael's new YouTube channel, The Michael Cohen Show, as well as his podcast, Mea Culpa and Political Beatdown.
Polls show that Harris is closing the gap with Trump on handling the economy. A major improvement, folks. You can't lose sight of that, from the double-digit advantage Trump held on President Biden over that particular issue. Joining us now, Wisconsin Democratic Party Chair Ben Wikler, Arizona Democratic Party Chair Yolanda Bejarano, and Michigan Democratic Party Chair Lavora Barnes. Welcome. I'm loving the chairs in the corner this morning. Yay.
Especially because they are the ones doing the heavy lifting right now. Ben, you had the vice president in your state. We'll get to that in a second. I think the bigger breaking news right now is what we heard, Yolanda, out of Arizona, the Supreme Court deciding nearly 100,000 voters will get full ballot access after a clerical error. Talk us through what that's going to mean for voters in your state and for this election.
Yeah, absolutely. We are so grateful to our Secretary of State, Adrian Fontes. The Arizona Supreme Court sided with him. And, close to 100,000 voters will be able to vote a full ballot. And this is just testament to Democrats fighting to make sure that Arizonans have their constitutional right to vote protected. And we're just so grateful.
Chairman Wikler, I was very much interested in how the vice president would begin to have this conversation around the economy, since it has been such a weak point for Democrats, despite all of the good news that has come out over the past year. And now with interest rates cuts by the Fed this week, 50 basis points, and Republicans whining about that, saying like that's a bad thing. I want you to listen to how, in this very, very loose moment with Oprah Winfrey, the vice president talks about her economic agenda relative to Donald Trump's.
Part of my plan is to give startup small businesses a $50,000 tax deduction to start up their small business. Right now, it's $5,000. Nobody can start a small business with $5,000. So that's part of my plan.
That's a teeny tiny business.
That's a business in
teeny tiny business.
It's a concept of a business, right?
Yes.
They ain't ready for this. This is a concept of a business. I mean, I love, and the thing about it is people got it. I think people get it. They understand what that means for a small business owner to now be able to have this infusion of support.
Absolutely. Tens of millions of Americans have small businesses, and many more people think about becoming their own boss and launching a small business or a side hustle that's a small business. But when you launch a small business, then you get hit by a tax bill because there's not withholding. And that can be hugely problematic for people. So having the vice president in the corner of everyone who has a dream, who wants to build wealth for themselves and their families by launching something that is their idea, not not just getting a job, that really speaks to a president who connects not just with people, as she says, trying to get by, but people trying to get ahead, people with aspirations. And it speaks to this big idea about the future, turning the page, thinking about where we want to go, not just going back to someplace where we've been. I think it ties in so deeply to the core idea of this campaign. It's why she has credibility on the economy in a way that has to be making Donald Trump panic a little bit.
Lavora, the national Teamsters chose not to endorse Kamala Harris, but the Michigan Teamsters did decide to endorse the vice president. Tell me how something like that plays in the state of Michigan.
You know, Michigan is a union state. You know, we are strong in support of our unions, and our unions are strong in support of our Democratic candidates from the bottom of the ticket to the top. The Teamsters here in Michigan have been terrific allies and partners of this party. They were very clear as I talked to them about their support for the vice president. Whatever the National did, I always felt that this state organization here in Michigan would step up and support the vice president. Their folks are ready to do the work that the other union folks are doing. Folks are out here knocking doors and making phone calls, talking to their fellow members and their fellow workers about the importance of this election, telling the story of who Donald Trump is and the lies he's told about jobs he would bring back to Michigan, jobs he actually sent away from Michigan, and about, of course, what Harris and Biden have done to bring jobs into Michigan and support these Teamsters and other union members. We know that in order to win this election here in Michigan, we need a strong coalition that includes each and every one of our union members and, of course, all of our other partners around the state. And they're leaned in deep here to make sure we get this done.
Yolanda, Arizona is important for so many different reasons. And, of course, as Alicia noted at the top of this conversation, the decision by the courts that clears the way for 100,000 voters in the state to participate who were otherwise potentially locked out is also good news. How are Arizonans sort of taking in all the attention, right, that comes with being an important battleground state, but B, looking at some of the issues that we've layered on the conversation today, the economy, for example, and small business components of that. Are they reading these candidates in light of, here's a solid plan, here's a way forward, $50,000 for you to start your small business, and over here's a concept paper about running a business, and take a look at that and tell me what you think. How are Arizonans reading all of this and being in this particular part of the vortex?
Yeah, as a reminder, in 2020, President Biden beat Donald Trump by just under 11,000 votes. The path to maintaining the Senate majority runs through Arizona. We've got Ruben Gallego going against an election denier, Kari Lake. We also have very competitive congressional seats that we lost in 2022 by very tiny margins, and we're set to flip them now. And we also have one of the closest state legislatures in the country. Yeah. And we are set to flip the legislature for the first time in over 60 years. And these are huge. It would be huge gains for Arizonans across the board. People, when you talk about the concept of the plan and you talk about what Vice President Harris offers Arizonans, small businesses, that is like the foundation of our state, small businesses. I think people are sick and tired of the racist rhetoric that is being perpetuated by the Republicans and the Republican Party in Arizona and Donald Trump. And people want to return to decency, and they want, good union jobs, which, the Biden-Harris administration has been at the forefront of protecting our union jobs and fighting for workers and working families. So I think we're seeing this across the board. When I travel around the state, people want somebody who is a leader. They want somebody like Kamala Harris and Governor Tim Walz, and not, a convicted felon in Donald Trump and J.D. Vance.
Ben Wickler, Yolanda is right to remind us that in as much as this is about the top of the ticket, it is also about these down ballot races. You got Governor Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania campaigning today in Wisconsin for U.S. Senate candidate Tammy Baldwin. You had Harris using part of her speech in Madison to rally for Baldwin. What do we need to understand about what is happening on the ground, beyond what is happening at the presidential level?
Senator Baldwin is a dynamite champion for working families across the state. There are so many places she can go where workers will say, I wouldn't have my job if it weren't for you fighting for Buy America policies, standing up for dairy farms, ensuring that Wisconsinites get a fair shake. And Wisconsin, like Arizona, is one of the states that'll determine the Senate majority. We also have at least 2 House races. You have Rebecca Cook running in the 3rd congressional district. A recent poll showed that she's up by 2 points against a terrible Republican, Derek Van Orden, who's nationally famous for screaming at teenagers in the Capitol. Peter Barker running against Brian Stile. You have Kristen Lyerly running for an open seat in the 8th congressional district. And then in the state legislature, we have fair maps for the first time in 14 years, thanks to a massive battle and finally a court decision. So because of that, we now have a chance to flip the state assembly majority in Wisconsin and break a Republican supermajority in the state Senate. These things can reshape politics in Wisconsin. And when you reshape politics in a swing state like Wisconsin, Michigan, or Arizona, it affects national politics as well. This is how we pass the national protections for abortion freedom, is by getting a Democratic Congress that can send the bill to President Harris's desk. And the down ballot implications for voting rights and everything else we care about in the state legislatures are vast. We're fighting at every level of the ballot. And if we win big this year, we will win at every level.
Lavora, given how Michigan's Republicans are such a hot mess, how do those down ballot races look in your state?
They look great. And despite hot mess or not, we know that there's always going to be money and interest coming in to Michigan to support these Republicans. These Republicans are aggressively trying to go after congressional seats here, and we're fighting back hard. We've got terrific candidates running across the state. Our state house is up. We know that if the Republicans could take that state house and break our trifecta, they would, so that they could try to block all of the good work that Democrats are doing. We're working hard. We've got great candidates on the doors, on the phones, raising the money, doing the work. And, Alyssa Slotkin is running for U.S. Senate against a Florida man who would ban abortion, but she's doing incredible work. And we intend to beat her and hold on to that seat that Debbie Stabenow has held so well for us here in Michigan. Our ground game is strong. We've got thousands of volunteers, hundreds of staff, 50-plus offices open. We run a full coordinated campaign from the bottom of the ticket to the top. We talk about all of our candidates on the doors. We've even got a Supreme Court race we're very focused on. We've got 2 terrific women. One is the first Black woman to be on our Michigan Supreme Court, who we're going to reelect, and we're going to elect another member of the Supreme Court who's a Democrat. We're all over the place here in Michigan, and we're going to win from the bottom to the top.
I love it. I love that energy coming from a state party chair. I love it. Chairs Ben Wickler, Yolanda Bejarano, and Lavora Barnes. Thank you so much. Really appreciate the hard work you're doing out there.
Well, I'm very excited to have joining me here in the studio Democratic Congressman from California, Robert Garcia. Usually it's long distance. This is much more fun. Hey, I'm going to ask you about this in a second, but quickly the news about Kamala Harris agreeing to a CNN debate October 23rd. Again, this is the debate. It will mirror the rules of the June debate that Donald Trump was singing its praises, saying he won it and he approved of everything. What's your best guess as to why Kamala Harris is doing it and your sense of whether or not Donald Trump will comply and participate?
Well, look, Vice President Harris has already said that she wants a second debate. Her team has said so. She said so within hours of the last debate. I think she wants to talk to the American people. She's ready to debate him again, but he is too scared to debate her.
You don't think he will?
I don't think he will. I mean, he should. He owes it to the public, but he won't. I mean, if you remember the first debate, he would not even look at her once. He never even glanced at her because he's a coward. He's too scared to debate her. So he should debate her. The rules will be the same as the first debate, which he agreed to against Joe Biden. So we'll see what he says. But I doubt he's going to say yes, but he absolutely should.
Okay. Let me get to your role on the Homeland Security Committee. How concerned are you about the impacts of the threats against the Haitians, what they've been doing, all of these lies that have been reported nonstop by Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, who have yet to reclaim them or say, nope, we were wrong? I mean, do you think there's any chance that Donald Trump sees some possible benefit to this?
I mean, this is just one. It's dangerous and quite bizarre what Donald Trump is doing. We just had a Homeland Security hearing this last week. We talked about this very issue. The reality is we know that his lies about immigrants eating pets, cats and dogs, is just ridiculous. The Republican governor, the Republican mayor, the city manager, even the person that initially reported the lie have all said that it's not true, yet he still continues to repeat this. And so does J.D. Vance, leaning into a story that is demonizing immigrants and causing great harm to Springfield, Ohio. There's been bomb threats. There are children that are scared to go to school. There are stores that are being closed because of Donald Trump's lies. And so why he continues to lean in on this, to me, is clear. It's xenophobia. It's the way he wants to demonize immigrants. He thinks it'll rile up his base. It's wrong, and it's not going to work.
You know, after Donald Trump faced that second attempt on his life, we're reminded that, you know, at one point after the first one, he was going to tone down the rhetoric. And yet what he's doing now is just blaming Democrats. I mean, look at these headlines here. He accuses them of ratcheting up the rhetoric, of him being a threat to democracy there. Never mind, by the way, his own frequent inflammatory remarks. How do you interpret his accusations? And do you think in this volatile political climate, it can be toned down? Again, Homeland Security, you're on the committee. You listen to the concerns out there.
You know, we all heard Donald Trump say after the assassination attempt, of course, that he was going to change his rhetoric and that the country needed to change its rhetoric. And we all agree. Political violence, of course, should be condemned against everyone. But he has not done that. In fact, he's doubled down on the absolute worst things someone can say. He has said that we're demonizing, as immigrants, the blood of this country. He's saying horrible lies of folks and women. He's sending all caps bizarre messages on his social media platform that he has. So he keeps attacking people and saying the absolute worst things you can say to rile up, I think, the worst in America: racism, xenophobia, attacks on women. And so he has shown no capacity to lead and no capacity to dial it back. And that's why we want to turn the page and elect Kamala Harris, someone that actually understands the American public, is supportive of people, and will represent everybody.
And here's another thing. One of his other big proposals is mass deportation of immigrants, right? He's going there. A new Scripps News Ipsos poll, it shows 54% of Americans support that idea, but Kamala Harris is on the campaign trail saying, no, this is not the solution. Let's take a listen to what she said.
Donald Trump and his extremist allies will keep trying to pull us backward. We all remember what they did to tear families apart. And now they have pledged to carry out the largest deportation, a mass deportation, in American history. Imagine what that would look like and what that would be. How's that going to happen? Massive raids? Massive detention camps? What are they talking about?
I mean, what are they talking about? She's outlining logistics, just how would they go about this? Why is it that Trump's message on immigration seems to resonate with some voters?
Look, it does resonate with some voters, which is really unfortunate. Donald Trump has made his career in attacking immigrants. That's what he does. That's what J.D. Vance does and the modern Republican Party. And so I'm not surprised that he's riling up the fears of folks when we know this is a country that supports immigrants. But I will add, in that same exact poll, there's also data that shows that a strong majority of this country also supports comprehensive immigration reform. And so I think the people in the American public have been clear. They believe in workers that are here to work, to be safe, to be good folks, and a pathway to citizenship for those that have earned it are all supported by a majority of the public.
Yeah. Let me ask you quickly about what you recently founded, a bipartisan YIMBY caucus on Capitol Hill. It is the opposite of NIMBY, right? Yes, in my backyard. What's that about?
Look, we're forming a bipartisan caucus in Congress to meet the challenges of the housing crisis. We know that housing is the single largest crisis in this country, and especially back home in my home state of California. And so we want to ensure that we're looking at zoning regulations, cutting the red tape, and increasing housing as much as we can across the country. We need millions of more units, and that's what this caucus is focused on.
Okay. Congressman Robert Garcia, open invitation to join me in the studio, but we'll see you long distance as well anytime. Thank you. Next.
During this Hispanic Heritage Month, we're going to take a look at the efforts that the Harris and the Trump campaigns are making to court this key voting bloc, which is among the fastest growing in the country. And somebody who knows more than me and is smarter than all of us, Maria Teresa Kumar, the CEO and the president of Voto Latino. Maria, un placer. Always to spend time with you.
So can we cut that clip and remind that to my husband when he basically says that we should go toe-to-toe. And you're like, no, she's the smartest one.
I'm happy to clarify that he needs to. No. He needs to take a seat.
Part of that clip.
He needs to take a seat. Let's talk about this. Voto Latino Foundation just rolled out this massive drive to mobilize the Latino vote. I'm based out of Miami. I get it. Had a great conversation with Paula Ramos the other day about the importance of the Latino vote. But I mean, I think we talk about this every election cycle, and yet talk about why it's so critical, this one especially.
Well, you know what's really exciting about the Latino community is that we are such a young community. So in rapid clip, we are helping change states that people thought were not up for grabs. They are, but simply because you have tens of thousands, in some cases hundreds of thousands, new Latino voters that didn't exist just 4 years ago. So even in Pennsylvania, where it's going to be super close, you have a good third of the Latino electorate is under the age of 35. In Arizona, it's 40%. In Nevada, it's literally 30%. But in Texas, it's close to 50% of the Latino vote is under the age of 35. And you have a massive amount of groups that just are not registered to vote. And so Vota con Ganas is all about saying, you know what, the water's warm. Come in, register, vote, participate, because this election is going to be decided by young people in these key states. Even when you see a place like Wisconsin, the reason that we basically got a Supreme Court was because all of those young people, disproportionately young people of color, came out and said, no, we actually want to revisit that Supreme Court.
But when you drill down, though, is there a common denomination in terms of the issues? Because we talk about the, quote, young vote, and we never want to talk about voting blocks as being monoliths. But is there some kind of, common denominator issue that also is resonating with the younger Latino vote that we're seeing in other demographics?
So the number one issue that we saw back in April, Katie, among 18 to 29-year-olds was housing, the cost of housing. And for us, we thought, oh, it's because you want to move away from your house, from your parents, or you want to live by yourself because you're tired of your roommates. No. In our focus groups, there was a young man. He was 22 years old. He was a baggage claim carrier in Phoenix, Arizona. And he says, when I speak about housing, I'm trying to balance my budget to see if I can afford my rent and afford 1 or 2 meals a day. Wow. That's really deep. And so it was not a surprise that Kamala Harris's campaign 2 weeks ago came out on signature housing because she recognizes that this multicultural generation of young people are facing issues that oftentimes single mothers face. When we did that same survey, 35% of Latino youth in the last year had to add government subsidies to their everyday living, and 22% went on to find another job. So they're not slackers. They're literally bearing the brunt of an economy. And Kamala Harris is saying, well, we're forgiving student loans. Yeah. We're helping you.
Home buyers.
Home buyers. Yeah. But we're also going to also build out affordable housing for you. That sounded almost like, a dog whistle for older people, but no, this was literally 18, 20, 29-year-olds.
So one thing that always sticks in my craw is disinformation and misinformation campaigns that are happening on Spanish language. I am blessed to be able to speak, read, and write Spanish fluently, but I'm concerned that there's no real fact-checking that's going on, and it's allowed to happen unfettered. Are there kind of some moves that are being made by, frankly, both campaigns to try to capitalize on the idea that Spanish language is the way that information is disseminated?
Well, I mean, I think on one side of the campaign, they're the perpetrators of the disinformation.
Yes, the GOP.
So it's really interesting. One of the things that the campaign is doing on Kamala Harris is that they're employing a lot of TikTok artists. They're really bringing in individuals to start talking about her agenda. One of the things at Voto Latino that we've done since 2022 is that we actually started combating disinformation by identifying everyday people who are hearing it and saying, well, what makes you think that? And then we do counter messaging. And we found that by counter messaging, it's an incredible intervention because not only are we able to convince people that government works for them when they vote, but then they stop spreading disinformation as well. At the end of the day, what we find in the Latino community is that we live in such a balkanized community of information sources that unless we have people there constantly talking about the issues that they care about, then you do have nefarious actors that fill that vacuum.
I want to ask you, too, about what I think is such a patronizing and very transparently gross way that Donald Trump thinks that he can court a minority vote. Nicky Jam, the reggaeton artist, Donald Trump calls Nicky Jam a woman, before Nicky Jam takes the stage. And for those of you who don't know, Nicky Jam is a man. Right. And Nicky Jam had endorsed Donald Trump to his millions of followers, but then he actually took it down and deleted it. But he actually gone so far as to say that he's actually withdrawing the endorsement. Right. But it just seems to be pandering, right? And I know there's a fine line between the sincerity of trying to court a vote and the pandering that we're seeing from the Republicans, but is there just an insult to the intelligence of the Hispanic voter to think that you want to put a reggaeton star on a stage and that means that, oh, I really understand you, Latino vote?
That's exactly right. And I think this is one of the reasons why when he came out and basically called him a woman, everybody was like, that actually tracks with you, Donald Trump. Yeah. You actually don't know who we are. You don't even know the person that just endorsed you. But there was also a massive backlash among the Latino community against that endorsement. Maná, who is an incredibly popular art, band around the country, basically said, we cannot work with you because this man, Donald Trump, is a direct threat to the livelihood of who we are as humans here in the United States.
Just as people.
As people. And so when we have these conversations in the Latino community, when we do focus groups, the number one reason people were even interested in voting for RFK was because they said Trump is too racist for us.
Oh, my gosh. Right? But then RFK.
Well, no, but that was when we were trying to figure out, the moment, this is what's really exciting when we're seeing in polls, is the moment that Kamala Harris went to the top of the ticket, we saw a huge move from the third party, which we expected. So they went 60% Kamala Harris, 7% RFK. They went 29% Donald Trump. Donald Trump, all of a sudden, has a formidable opponent because she was taking from him. And we're going to see a real political realignment in closing voter registration gaps in places like Nevada, Arizona, even Pennsylvania, because she is on top of the ticket. And she's not only talking, she's not, her story is not just something that they identify with, but she's speaking to the issues they corely care about.
Maria Teresa Kuma, un placer.
Un placer siempre.
A pleasure always to spend time with you. Thank you for coming here. I appreciate it.